and welcome to Little Learners. In today's video, I wanted to give some advice to fellow teachers who happen to have a disability or chronic illness. However, before we get started, I want to let you know that this video is sponsored by KiwiCo. Keep watching and I will let you know more about them later. As a disabled teacher myself, I have been through some difficult times. Now, before I move on, I just want to say that when I say disabled, I mean anyone with a physical or mental impairment, anyone with a chronic illness that's long-term and affects their life, anyone with mental health issues that affect their lives, anyone with a long-standing health condition, basically, that really does impact on your life. So that's what I mean when I say disabled or disability. So just to give you a little rundown before we get on to the advice, I myself have a few different conditions. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobility type, I have bile acid malabsorption, myalgic encephalomyelitis, try saying that 10 times fast, and I've also been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. But I think I'll do a separate video about my experience, so look out for that. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview before we get onto the advice, otherwise you'd be thinking, well, why does this person think that they can give me advice? So let's get on to the tips. It turned out that I'd written down 10 tips, so let's get on to the 10 top tips for teachers with disabilities. So my first piece of advice would be that when you are interviewing for a job, to be as open and honest as possible. Now, I think that a lot of people with disabilities or health conditions do worry about this in any area of work, because you worry that if you are honest about your health problems at an interview, then the person interviewing you might not want to employ you because they don't want to deal with the fact that you've got a disability. Now, I completely understand where you're coming from if that is your way of thinking. However, I would stress that if you did interview for a job and they are the type of people who would discriminate against you because you're disabled, I wouldn't want to work for them anyway. So I think being open and honest means that if someone does end up discriminating against me because I'm disabled and doesn't employ me simply because I'm disabled, I am glad that I won't be working for them anyway, because could you imagine how awful it would be to work for them? Now, I just want to say here that discriminating against someone because they're disabled and not giving them a job purely because they have a disability or a health condition is completely illegal, and you are protected by the Equality Act of 2010. However, we all know it happens, and I would just say that being open and honest just means that you know that if you do get a job somewhere, they are understanding and they took you on knowing that you have these disabilities and health conditions and you might need some reasonable adjustments, which we'll get onto later. And so they probably are the kind of people that you want to work for. My next piece of advice would be consider what will work for your health. So being a teacher in particular, it's very difficult to have a flexible working agreement. It's much easier to do so in other jobs, maybe office jobs or jobs where you can work from home. And teaching is very difficult because the children are only in between 9 and 3. So it can be a little bit tricky to figure out how you're going to make that work for you. So really have a think about if full-time work is going to work for you and your health, or if you need to look at more part-time or a job share maybe, so that you can make sure you are giving your best when you are at work, but also you're giving your body time to recover if your disability needs that. My disability definitely does need that. I can't do traditional work full-time anymore, which I will get onto in another video, and it just meant that I really had to reevaluate how I looked at work and how I was going to look after my body. So make sure that you give that some considerate thought. Tip 3 is probably very obvious, but it's to do with any medication that you need to take while you're at school or at work. Make sure you keep it locked away. So for many of us with different health conditions, we are taking lots of different medication throughout the day, whether it's medication that you take regularly anyway, or if it's pain medication that you need to take quite often, we are always taking it. So when you're at school, especially with children around, you just need to make sure that this is locked away somewhere that they cannot get to. Even if they're older children, just make sure they cannot get to it. So I was fortunate in my first classroom that I had a cupboard that I could lock. So I locked the cupboard, and also in the cupboard my medication was in like a little box right on the top shelf that children could never get to, but they couldn't get into the cupboard anyway. So just make sure that it's in a safe place, but also somewhere close to you. So if you're thinking, well, I suppose I could lock it away in the medical room, but the medical room is going to take you a really long time to get to, that's not going to work for you. So just make sure that there's somewhere close by that you can keep it, and if there isn't, then speak to your school about how they can help you facilitate that. Maybe there's something that they could put in, maybe they could put in like a lockbox into your classroom just so that you can have your medication close by. So make sure you talk to them about that if you're not sure where to put it. Moving on from that, my fourth tip is about reasonable adjustments. Now this is a term that you may have heard of or you may not have heard of. This is something that for anyone who has a disability or a chronic health condition, you can speak to your employer at any job, not just in a school, about reasonable adjustments. So some of these might include if you are in a wheelchair and there is no ramp to get into school, you'll need to speak to the school about that, and that would be a reasonable adjustment that they would need to put in so that you can get in and out of the building. That's quite a standard one. Other reasonable adjustments might be adjustments to your time of day. So if most teachers are due into school at 7:30, but you know that mornings are really difficult for your condition, you might want to talk to the school about you being a little bit more flexible. So sometimes you might be able to get in at 7:30, but other times you might not be able to get in until 8:15, and just so that they know that you kind of need some flexibility around that. Another example of a reasonable adjustment might be that if you have to leave the classroom very suddenly because of pain or maybe fatigue, that your school is able to support you with that. So if you need to, I don't know, go into the staff room for a bit to have a lie down or to deal with your pain, that the school knows that there is a system in place for that and that someone can go into your classroom to kind of cover you. Obviously, it really depends on the person and on the health condition. So just have a think about things that might help you to do your job, basically, and speak to your school about that and about the adjustments that they can put in place. Again, if they are reasonable adjustments, which most of the things you would ask for are, then the school or any employer has to do them. They have to make them, unless they can make a case for it not being reasonable. For example, it's too expensive for them to afford. And if that is the case, then my next tip could definitely help you. However, before we move on to my next tip, I just want to tell you about today's sponsor. KiwiCo is a monthly subscription crate that comes filled with age-appropriate STEAM projects for children, designed to spark creativity, thinking, and learning. These boxes are made for a range of ages from toddlers to teenagers. Every box has all of the materials you need to create the project. It also includes really easy instructions, plus a book or magazine and an activity guide for parents. You can click on the link in the description box below to find out more about KiwiCo, and you can use the code LEARNERS to get your first month free. Back to the video. So my next tip is about the scheme Access to Work. You can access this scheme if you are in the UK, and they support people with disabilities and health conditions to make reasonable adjustments in the workplace. Again, this isn't just for schools, this is in any workplace, and in many cases they can help to cover the cost of a reasonable adjustment that your employer can't afford. They can also come into your workplace and kind of have a look around and suggest adjustments that should be made for you, because sometimes, depending on your illness or disability, you're not quite sure what adjustments would make life easier, and it's all to do with making sure that you have exactly the same opportunities as non-disabled teachers. So it's really helpful for them to come in and take a look around and say to you, well, actually, I would suggest you doing this, and you might think, oh, actually, that would be really helpful. So it's just nice to get their expertise, and they can also help with funding. I will put a link in the description box below so that you can have a look at Access to Work if you think it would be helpful. My next tip is if you are having difficulty with anything, be it your condition or the way that your condition is affecting your ability to work, make sure you speak to someone about it. So you may want to speak to your line manager or your head teacher, or you may want to speak to your doctor about it. If you are struggling, it's really important to speak to someone. It may be that there is something that they can do to help you, or it may be that because of your health, you need some time off. Just make sure that you speak up and get the help that you need. Please do not just suffer in silence, because there are lots of things that everyone can do to help you. I know it can be really difficult to ask for help or admit that you need help, because a lot of us with disabilities can be very stubborn. We don't want our disability to kind of win, so we want to just carry on as normal. So please make sure that you do ask for help if you need it. Tip 8 is to look ahead to school events so that you can plan for them accordingly. So for example, if you've got a trip coming up in a few months and you know that it's the kind of trip that you might struggle with a bit because it involves a lot of walking over the entire day and you struggle with that, or for any other number of reasons, then you need to kind of look ahead and speak to your colleagues and maybe your line manager about how best to deal with that. So it may be that when you go on a trip like that and maybe you suffer with really, really bad fatigue and you know that a trip like that is going to completely take it out of you and you might need to take some time just to sit and rest, then something that you and your colleagues can discuss between you is the group that you've got on that trip. Maybe you haven't got your whole class, maybe you've probably got just a smaller group. That's usually what happens on trips with younger children. If you do need to go and kind of take a rest for a little while, then someone else is kind of designated to take over your group just to make sure that the trip can still run smoothly and you don't feel pressure to carry on working when you know that you can't. Tip 9 is to make sure that support is in place. So with all the things that I've kind of just said about, make sure it happens. So sometimes, unfortunately, people speak to their employers about reasonable adjustments that need to take place or difficulties they're having, and nothing gets done. And so it's really important that if you feel that nothing has happened yet or things are going a bit slowly, that you chase it up, because a lot of the time it probably isn't, I would hope, out of malice. It's just that it's kind of gone on the back burner, and even though it's really important to you, the people who have to deal with it have other things on their priority list. So just make sure you kind of chase those up, make sure it just doesn't get swept under the carpet. That kind of leads on to my final tip. If you feel that you are being mistreated or discriminated against because of your disability, speak up. This is so important, and I will talk about my experience with this in a future video. I really hope that anyone watching this doesn't have to deal with that, but unfortunately it does happen. Discrimination against people with disabilities does take place, and a lot of the time the people being discriminated against don't have the means to stand up for themselves, especially if they are suffering from a mental health condition. So if this is happening to you, I know it is a horrible experience. It is absolutely heartbreaking. You can feel that you are really being bullied or you are really being kind of broken down. Make sure you speak up. If your employer is not listening and not taking it seriously enough, first thing I would say is to call your union, because they will be able to give you advice about what to do. You can also contact ACAS. I will put their number down in the description box below. They are kind of a mediator for solving issues between employers and employees. They can be really helpful. They don't take sides, they just give you really good advice about what to do next. And make sure you speak to your own support system, so your family, your friends, about it, so that you're not suffering in silence. I really hate to end this video on such a negative note, and I'm sure that many teachers who have disabilities never have to deal with this kind of discrimination, but it does happen, and I just want to make it very clear that you have rights, and don't feel like just because you have a disability that you deserve to be treated this way, because you do not. And of course, if you want to ask any questions about anything I've spoken about in today's video, please do not hesitate to contact me. You can let me know in the comments below if you have a question. You can contact me on my social media, Instagram or Facebook, at Little Learners Videos for both. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a like, as that really helps out the channel. Thanks again to our sponsors today, KiwiCo. Don't forget to check them out. And if you haven't already, do click that subscribe button and the bell so you get notified every time I post a new video. I'm hoping to post a video soon about my experience being a disabled teacher, so look out for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.